Oh no!
She was standing in her own kitchen on an ordinary Tuesday morning, holding a cup of coffee she would never finish, when the floor disappeared from underneath everything she had ever believed about her life. Not because something loud happened, not because someone walked through the door with a confession ready on their lips. The floor disappeared because of a phone, a glowing screen, a name saved under a contact that was not what it appeared to be. And in the span of about 45 seconds, 11 years of marriage, 11 years of trust, 11 years of building something she thought was solid and real and hers, all of it cracked open like a fault line that had been quietly shifting beneath the surface for a very long time. She didn't scream. She didn't throw anything. She stood right there at that kitchen counter, put the coffee cup down very slowly, and she breathed. Before we go any further into this story, I need you to understand something. This is not a story about a woman falling apart. This is a story about a woman who, in the worst moment of her life, made one single decision that would rewrite the entire future. Not just her own, but the future of 3 other people who had no idea what was about to change. Her name is Diana,
Diana.
and what Diana did next is the reason you are watching this right now. What Diana did next is the kind of thing that people will argue about in comment sections and around dinner tables and in group chats for a long time after you share this video. Because what Diana did was not what anyone expected her to do. Not her friends, not her family, not the man who had been betraying her for nearly 2 years, and certainly not the man on the other end of the phone when she finally decided to make that call. This story is real. The names have been changed to protect the people involved, but the events, the timeline, the pain, and this is what you need to stay for, the extraordinary, almost impossible outcome. All of it happened. I'm going to show you a flash forward right now, and I need you to hold on to this image. 2 people standing together in October sunlight, making a choice that began in one of the most painful moments either of them had ever lived through. That wedding happened, and by the time this video is over, you are going to understand exactly what it took for those 2 people to get there, and why the road they walked to reach that moment is one of the most quietly extraordinary things I have come across in a very long time. Now let me ask you 3 questions, and I need you to hold all 3 of them in your head as we go through this story together. The first question is this: why? When Diana found out that her husband Marcus had been sleeping with his boss, a woman named Renee, why did she not call Renee? Why did she not confront the woman who had been sitting across boardroom tables from her husband while also sitting in hotel rooms? Why did Diana skip right over Renee and dial a completely different number, the number of a man she had never met, a man named Carter, who happened to be Renee's husband? The second question is this: what did Carter say in the first 10 seconds of that call that made Diana go completely silent? And the third question, the one that changes everything, the one that is going to stay with you long after this video ends, is simply this: how do 2 people who were each betrayed by the same affair end up choosing each other? How does that story begin? And is it possible that sometimes the worst thing that ever happens to you opens a door to the best thing you never saw coming? Before we go deeper into this story, let us know in the comments where you are watching from. We would love to hear from you. And if you are not already subscribed to this channel, please hit that subscribe button right now so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. We cover stories just like this one every single week. Real, human, complicated stories that remind you that life has a way of turning out in ways that no one could have planned. Now, let's go back to the beginning. Let's go back to Diana, standing in that kitchen on that Tuesday morning with a cup of coffee going cold on the counter and a crack running through everything she thought was true. Because before we can understand what she decided to do, we need to understand who Diana was. We need to understand who Marcus was. We need to understand who Renee was. And most importantly, we need to understand who Carter was. Because Carter is the character that changes this entire story. Carter is the one that nobody sees coming. There are four people at the center of this story, and I want to introduce each of them to you properly before we go any further. Because one of the things that makes this story so powerful is that none of these four people are cardboard cutouts. None of them are easy to reduce to a single label. You are going to feel things about all four of them that surprise you, including the ones you think you are going to feel the simplest about. The four people are Diana, Marcus, Renee, and Carter. And the way their lives collided and the direction those lives took after the collision is what this entire story is built around. But before we go into who they each were and how they got here, I want to lay out the three questions at the center of everything. Three questions that, if you understand them by the end of this video, will mean that you truly understand what happened here. Not just the facts of it, but the why of it, which is always the more important and the more human part of any story. The first question is the one that stops people cold every single time this story gets told. When Diana discovered that Marcus, her husband of 11 years, the man she had built a home and a life and a future with, had been sleeping with his boss, a woman named Renee, why did she pick up the phone and call Renee's husband Carter instead of calling Renee herself? Think about what the instinct would be for most people in that situation. Most people would want to confront the other woman directly. Most people would want to look that person in the eye, or at least hear that person's voice crumble on the other end of a phone line. That is what the anger demands. That is what the pain pushes you toward. And Diana was angry. Diana was in pain. But Diana did something different. Diana made a calculated, deliberate, almost inexplicably composed decision to call Carter instead. And understanding why she made that choice is one of the keys to understanding everything that came after. The second question is deceptively simple, but it carries enormous weight once you understand the full context. When Diana called Carter, a man she had never spoken to, a stranger she only knew existed because of a contact name saved in her cheating husband's phone, what did Carter say in the first few moments of that call that made Diana go completely quiet? Not quiet in the way you go quiet when someone says something cruel. Quiet in the way you go quiet when someone says something that lands in a part of you that you were not expecting to be touched. Whatever Carter said in those first moments, and we will get to the exact words, it set the entire tone for everything that followed between them. It established in the space of a single phone call what kind of man Carter was. And who Carter was as a man is ultimately the hinge on which this entire story turns. The third question is the big one, the one that people debate, the one that some people think is romantic, and some people think is complicated, and some people think is both at once, which is probably the most honest answer. How do two people who were each destroyed by the same act of betrayal, two people who were strangers before that betrayal happened, who had no reason to ever cross paths, who were each dealing with their own version of the same wound, how do those two people end up standing together in October sunlight, making vows, choosing each other? Is that a love story? Is that a survival story? Is it both? Is it possible that Diana and Carter would have found each other regardless if life had lined up differently? Or did it take something being completely dismantled for something real to have the room to grow? There is no clean answer to that, but by the end of this video, you will have enough of the story to form your own. And your answer is going to be worth something because this story earned it. Let's start with Diana, because Diana is the person this story belongs to in the deepest sense. Diana was 43 years old at the time this story begins, though the seeds of what happened were planted much earlier, back when she was 32 and standing at the altar of a church in the Midwest, marrying a man she genuinely believed was the best decision she had ever made. She was the kind of woman who is easy to underestimate if you are not paying close attention. She was warm without being naive. She was organized without being rigid. She kept a color-coded calendar on the wall of her kitchen. Not because she was anxious, but because she genuinely liked the feeling of a life that made sense. A life where things were where they were supposed to be, and people showed up when they said they would. She remembered the birthdays of people who had forgotten their own. She sent cards in the mail, real cards, handwritten, not the kind you forward on a phone. She was the sort of woman who makes a community function without ever getting credit for it, and she was fine with that because she was not doing it for credit. She was doing it because it was right. She and Marcus had been together for 13 years total, 2 years dating, 11 years married. And from the outside looking in, their life read like a success story in the most straightforward American sense of the phrase. They had a house in a good neighborhood. They had a daughter named Lily, who was 14 at the time this story begins, and who Diana describes as the best and most complicated thing that has ever happened to her. They took vacations in the summer. They argued about small things, whose turn it was to call the plumber, whether to repaint the living room, why Marcus could never remember to put the lid back on the coffee canister, and those arguments always resolved themselves before bedtime, because that was one of the unspoken rules of their marriage. One of the things Diana had quietly decided early on was non-negotiable. They did not go to sleep angry. 11 years. That rule held for 11 years, until it didn't. Until the thing that broke between them was too large for any rule to contain. Diana worked part-time as a hospital administrator. She had built her career carefully, the way she built everything, methodically, without dramatics, with a long view toward what was sustainable, rather than what was immediately impressive. She was respected at work. She was the person colleagues came to when something needed to be handled with discretion and with care, because everyone who worked with her knew that Diana would handle it correctly, would not make it messy, would think it through before she opened her mouth. This detail matters more than it might seem right now, because the way Diana handled her professional life, the composure, the gathering of information before acting, the refusal to be rushed into decisions that could not be undone, that is the exact same quality that determined how she responded when her personal life exploded. Diana did not unravel. Diana assessed. And that instinct, which most people would call self-control, was the thing that put her on a collision course with a completely different future than the one she had been living inside. Now let's talk about Marcus, because Marcus deserves to be understood before he is judged, even though what he did was, at its core, a straightforward betrayal. Marcus was 45 years old, handsome in an unremarkable way, the kind of handsome that photographs well but doesn't stop a room. He was charismatic in professional settings, the type of man who remembered names, who asked follow-up questions in meetings, who made whoever he was talking to feel temporarily like the most interesting person in the building. He had been in sales and account management his entire career, and he was good at it in the way that people who are naturally good at reading a room are good at things that require reading a room. He worked hard, he provided. He was not cruel. He was not, by most of the measurements people use for these things, a bad man. But he was a man who had grown quietly restless inside a life that fit him correctly in almost every way, which is one of the most dangerous kinds of restlessness there is, because it gives you nothing obvious to point to, nothing to use as justification, nothing to blame except a vague and formless hunger that he had not examined closely enough to understand. Marcus had been at his company for 6 years when Renee was brought in as the new regional director, 18 months before Diana discovered the affair. He respected Renee immediately, which became the first problem. He was impressed by her, which became the second. And somewhere in the space between respect and impression, in the context of long hours and shared professional pressure, and the particular intimacy that comes from working closely with someone who is genuinely good at what they do, something shifted. It did not shift overnight. These things almost never do. They shift the way seasons shift, so gradually that you can never point to the exact day the temperature changed, only to the morning when you look outside and realize that everything looks different than it did before. By the time Marcus fully understood what was happening between himself and Renee, it had already been happening for months. And by the time he thought seriously about stopping it had begun to feel as impossible as reversing weather. Renee is the most complicated character in this story, and it is important to say that clearly rather than letting the easy version of her, the villain version, take over the narrative. Renee was 48 years old. She had been the first woman in her family to finish a 4-year college degree. She had spent 15 years at her company working twice as hard as the men around her for half the recognition, until finally, 18 months before this story reaches its crisis point, she was given the leadership role she had earned years earlier. She was sharp. She was strategic. She could walk into a room full of skeptics and walk out having changed 2 or 3 minds without anyone quite being able to trace the moment it happened. She was, professionally speaking, exactly the kind of woman who makes other people raise their standards simply by being in the same space. None of that excuses what she did, but all of that is necessary context for understanding who she was as a full human being, rather than as a plot device in someone else's story. Renee had been married to Carter for 14 years. They had built what looked like a stable, quiet life. Carter running his own landscaping business, home every evening by 5:30, making dinner on Thursday nights because that was the night Renee had late calls. Present and dependable in all the ways that people celebrate in theory and sometimes fail to appreciate in practice. Renee had married Carter when she was 34 and he was 38. And in the early years of their marriage, the stability he offered had felt like exactly what she needed, a counterweight to the intensity and unpredictability of her professional life. But marriages change, people change, and somewhere along the way, in a shift that Renee herself has been honest about in accounts of this story, the counterweight she had once valued began to feel like stillness she had not chosen. She did not communicate this. She did not ask for anything to be different. She made a different choice instead. And that choice lit a fuse that none of them, not Renee, not Marcus, not Diana, and not Carter, were prepared for when it finally reached the end. And then there is Carter, quiet, steady Carter, who is the character that everyone tends to overlook in the early part of this story, and the character that absolutely nobody overlooks by the end of it. Carter was 52 years old, tall, the kind of physically capable that comes from working outside with your hands for 30 years, rather than from a gym membership. He had built his landscaping business from nothing, one truck, one set of equipment, and a reputation for showing up on time and doing exactly what he said he would do. And over the course of 2 decades, that reputation had turned into something real and sustainable. He was not wealthy in the way that makes people flashy, but he was financially solid in the way that makes people secure, and he understood the difference. He called his mother every Sunday. He coached his youngest son's baseball team for 3 years. He had a group of friends he had known since high school and still met for breakfast on the first Saturday of every month at the same diner they had been going to since their 20s. Carter was the kind of man who, when he told you he would do something, did it. When he told you he felt something, he meant it. He was not complicated in the way the world sometimes rewards, but he was genuine in a way the world almost always needs and almost always undervalues. What Carter did not know, what he had no reason to suspect, because Renee had given him no obvious signs to read, and because Carter was not the kind of man who went looking for problems that had not presented themselves, was that while he was coming home at 5:30 and making dinner on Thursday nights and calling his mother on Sundays and being the steady, reliable, honest man he had always been, his wife was living a completely different story in the hours between. Carter found out the same way Diana found out, from a phone call he did not expect, containing information he was not ready to receive, that rearranged in the space of a few minutes everything he thought he knew about the life he had been living. The difference between Diana's discovery and Carter's is that Carter did not discover on his own. Carter was told. Carter was told by Diana. And the way he responded to that call is what this whole story is really about. The signs, Diana says now, were there before she had language for them. This is the part that betrayed partners almost universally describe, this sense in retrospect of having known something without knowing that they knew it. A shift in atmosphere, a change in the texture of ordinary moments. The way a person who has always been careless with their phone suddenly becomes very careful. The way a person who has always come home at a predictable time starts coming home at unpredictable ones. The way someone's eyes go somewhere else even when they are standing right in front of you and looking directly at your face. Diana noticed all of it. She noticed the phone, which began living face down on every surface in the house, roughly 14 months into Renee's tenure as Marcus's boss. She noticed the wardrobe, new shirts appearing in the closet that she had not seen him purchase, better fitting than what he usually bought, the kind of thing a man buys when he has started seeing himself through someone else's eyes. She noticed the late nights, which arrived with increasingly elaborate explanations attached to them. Client dinners, project deadlines, team strategy sessions that apparently could only happen between 8 and 11 in the evening. She noticed all of it, and she told herself, as millions of people in her position have told themselves before her and will tell themselves after her, that she was being paranoid, that she was being insecure, that she was letting anxiety invent problems where none existed. This is one of the cruelest mechanics of betrayal, the way it weaponizes the betrayed person's own instincts against them, the way it makes their accurate perception of reality feel like a character flaw, a form of neediness, an overactive imagination in need of management. Diana went to sleep for weeks telling herself she was imagining it. She searched her own mind for evidence that she was wrong, rather than searching her husband's behavior for evidence that she was right. She was not wrong. She was never wrong. But she did not know that yet. And so she kept making the bed every morning and putting dinner on the table every evening and showing up to her own life with the full commitment of a person who had decided to believe the best possible version of what was in front of her. The company holiday party was in December, and this is the moment Diana points to when she tries to identify the first crack, not in her suspicions, because those had been building quietly for months, but in her ability to keep those suspicions at bay. Marcus always invited her to his company events, and she always went because she was a good partner and because she was genuinely interested in the world he inhabited during the hours they spent apart. She had met several of his colleagues over the years and knew them by name. She had met Renee briefly once before, a few weeks after the promotion, at a smaller office gathering. Renee had been warm that night, professional, shook Diana's hand with both hands the way some people do to signal that they mean it. Diana had walked away from that first meeting thinking, I like her. She is competent and she seems like someone who would be fair to work for. There was no red flag in that meeting. There was no discomfort. There was simply a professional woman meeting another professional woman and coming away with a favorable impression. Which, Diana says now with a kind of rueful laugh that she has earned, makes a certain kind of horrible sense in retrospect. At the holiday party that December, something different happened. Diana cannot fully explain it because there was nothing explicit, nothing obvious. There was no moment of Marcus's hand lingering too long on Renee's arm, no stolen glance caught in a mirror, nothing that would have constituted evidence if submitted to any reasonable person. What there was, and Diana describes this with precision, the way people describe things they have replayed thousands of times, was a look. Across the room. Half a second, maybe less. The kind of look that does not need words because it already contains an entire conversation. Renee was across the room talking to a colleague, and Marcus was near the bar talking to someone else. And for one fraction of 1 second, their eyes met. And what Diana saw in that exchange was not attraction. It was not longing. It was something more intimate and more unsettling than either of those things. It was familiarity. The deep, private, cellular familiarity of two people who have been sharing something they are keeping secret from the room. Diana looked away. She picked up her glass. She told herself she was tired. She was not tired. She spent the next 4 weeks after that party doing something that, in retrospect, she describes as both the most difficult and the most clarifying thing she had ever done. She paid attention. Not in an anxious, frantic way, not in the way that fear drives attention, wide-eyed and reactive. She paid attention the way she had been trained to pay attention by years of managing complex systems at work. Methodically, without judgment, gathering data points and recording them in a part of her mind that she kept separate from the part that still had to get up every morning and make lunches and return work emails and be a present mother and a functioning human being. She noted the times. She noted the patterns. She did not go through his phone, not yet, because some part of her was still not ready to confirm what another part of her already knew. That changed on a Tuesday in January. A Tuesday that started as an ordinary Tuesday, coffee brewing, Lily getting ready for school, the familiar sounds of a household in its morning routine, and ended as the day Diana's life split cleanly into before and after. Marcus had left his laptop open on the kitchen counter. This was unusual. Marcus was meticulous about his devices in the way that people are meticulous about things they are protecting. And it was unusual enough that Diana noticed it immediately when she walked into the kitchen after Lily left for school. He had been called out to the garage moments before by a delivery, setting the laptop down mid-task, and that small interruption, that ordinary logistical inconvenience, became the hinge point on which everything turned. Diana stood in her kitchen and looked at the open laptop. She has said, in accounts of this story, that she stood there for a full minute before she moved toward it. That minute mattered. It was the last minute of a version of her life that was about to stop existing. She read the email that was open on the screen. She has never described its contents in detail publicly, and she does not need to. What she has said is that it was not explicit. It was worse than explicit. It was intimate in the way that only comes from time and closeness, and the accumulated private language of two people who have let each other in. It was the kind of email that does not need to say anything directly, because everything it means is contained in what it does not say. She closed the laptop carefully. She heard Marcus's footsteps on the driveway. She walked to the bathroom, closed the door, turned the faucet on, and stood over the sink for 6 minutes. She knows it was 6 minutes because she counted the seconds. Not consciously, not as a strategy, but because counting was the only thing available to the part of her brain that needed something to hold on to, while the rest of her processed what she had just read. She did not cry. She would cry later, privately, in controlled increments, the way she did most things, not because she was suppressing it, but because she understood instinctively that she needed to be clear right now, not shattered. She needed to think. She needed to know what she was dealing with before she decided what to do about it. When Marcus came back inside, she was at the kitchen table with her coffee cup, and they had breakfast together, and she said nothing. Marcus, for his part, noticed nothing. And Diana looked at the man across the table from her and began very quietly to build a case. Over the next 4 days, Diana gathered information the way she had always gathered information about anything that mattered. Carefully, completely, and without tipping her hand. She went through what she could access without alerting him. She cross-referenced dates against the timeline of inconsistencies she had been compiling in her mind for months. She confirmed things she had suspected. She found the number. It was saved in Marcus's phone under an innocuous name. A name that was not Renee. A name that would have meant nothing to anyone glancing at his contact list. Diana wrote it down. She did not know yet exactly what she was going to do with it, but she is a methodical woman, and methodical women write things down. The next question was whose number it was. And when Diana searched the number and found the name attached to it, Carter, listed to a residential address across town, last name matching Renee's, something clicked into place in her mind that she has described as both devastating and strangely clarifying at the same time. Because now she understood the full shape of what she was holding, and now she had to decide what to do with it. The decision not to call Renee was not a passive one. It was not born from fear or from uncertainty or from any desire to preserve the marriage by avoiding the confrontation. Diana had already understood, by the time she found Carter's number, that the marriage as she had known it was over. That was not the question. The question was what the next chapter of her life was going to look like, and what kind of woman she was going to be inside it. And calling Renee felt to Diana like a move made from the emotional center of the wound. Reactive, loud, the kind of thing that produces heat without producing clarity. Diana did not want heat, she wanted truth. She wanted someone on the other side of this wreckage who understood what it felt like to have the ground removed from underneath a life they had trusted completely. She wanted, in the words she has used herself, a witness. And so she did not call Renee, she called Carter. And that decision, that single, quiet, composed, and in many ways extraordinary decision, is what changed everything. Diana made the call on a Thursday morning at 9:47. She knows the time because she looked at the clock before she dialed. The way you look at a clock before you do something you understand you cannot undo. Marcus was at work. Lily was at school. The house was quiet in the particular way that houses are quiet when the person who lives in them is on the verge of changing their life. She sat at the kitchen table, the same table where she had eaten 4 breakfasts across from Marcus since reading that email without saying a word. And she dialed the number she had written down in her own handwriting 3 days earlier. Carter picked up on the second ring. He answered with a simple, "Hello," and Diana said her name. She told him her husband's name. She told him where her husband worked. She told him who her husband's boss was. And then she stopped talking. The silence that followed was not brief. It lasted long enough for Diana to understand, from the quality of it alone, that Carter was not a man who filled silence carelessly. He was someone who sat inside it until he knew what needed to be said. And then he said the thing that made Diana go quiet in a way she had not expected. He said, "Thank you for calling me. I'm sorry you had to." Not, "Are you sure?" Not, "What are you talking about?" Not the defensive scramble of a man trying to construct a version of reality he can still live inside. Just that, a simple, dignified acknowledgement that what Diana had done was an act of courage, delivered by a man who already understood, from the weight of those few sentences alone, that it was true. Diana has said that she had prepared herself for many possible responses to that call. She had prepared herself for denial. She had prepared herself for anger. She had even prepared herself for the possibility that Carter already knew and had chosen to do nothing, which would have produced its own particular kind of grief. She had not prepared herself for kindness. She had not prepared herself for a man who, in the first 10 seconds of receiving the worst news of his life, thought to acknowledge her experience before processing his own. That response did not make her fall in love with Carter. Love was nowhere near the conversation at that point, but it made her pay attention. It was the first data point in what would become, over the next 2 years, a very long and very clear picture of who Carter was. The call lasted 23 minutes. By the end of it, they had agreed on one thing without quite putting it into those words. They both needed to hear the truth directly from the people who owed it to them. They were not coordinating a confrontation. They were not making a plan together. They were simply 2 people who had just been handed the same devastating information from opposite sides of the same betrayal, and who had each decided, in their own way, that the next move belonged to them, and not to the people who had wronged them. They hung up. They each went home that night. They each had the conversations that needed to be had. And within 48 hours, as Diana had understood they would, both marriages were over. Not legally, not yet, but in the way that matters most, which is the way that happens in a room between 2 people when the truth has finally been said out loud, and the air changes, and everybody knows there is no path back to what things were before. Marcus's conversation with Diana did not unfold as a dramatic scene, though perhaps it should have. By the time Diana sat across from him and told him what she knew, she had already done most of her grieving internally. Not all of it, not even close, but enough of it that she could be steady. She showed him what she had. She said his name. She watched his face. And Marcus, charismatic, professionally confident, people reading Marcus, did something that surprised her because it was the most honest thing he had done in 2 years. He did not deny it for long. He confirmed it. He apologized in the way that people apologize when they know that apologizing is insufficient, which is to say, the apology was real, but it was also clearly inadequate for the size of what it needed to address. He said he did not know how it had happened, which was probably the first genuinely true thing he had said to her in a long time, because the truth is that it had happened the way these things always happen. Gradually, then suddenly, driven by a need he had not examined and a choice he had not taken seriously, until the choice had already been made so many times that it had become a reality of its own. He said he was sorry. She believed that he meant it, and then she asked him to leave.
I think
And he
it's
did.
time for you to leave.
Across town in a house Diana had never been inside and would not see for many months, Carter sat across from Renee and received for the second time in 2 days the full weight of something true. Renee cried. She tried to explain because people in that position always try to explain, because explanation feels like it might create context that makes the inexplicable somehow legible. She said the marriage had felt empty to her for a long time. She said she had not known how to say that. She said things that were probably true and that also could not function as justification because they were things that could have been said to Carter directly at any point over the years rather than being offered now as retroactive context for a betrayal. Carter listened. Carter did what Carter always did, which was to sit very still and process what was happening without performing a response before he was ready to give a real one. And when Renee finished, Carter looked at her for a long moment and said 4 words. Just 4. He said, "You could have told me." And then he stood up, walked out of the room, and that was the end of 14 years of marriage, compressed into one sentence that contained a lifetime of its worth. You could have told me. Those 4 words have stayed with everyone who has heard this story because they are not angry words. They are the words of a man who is not looking to wound the person across from him, but who needs her and himself to understand the full dimension of what was lost. He had been available. He had been present. He had been home at 5:30. He could have been told. He was not. And now it was over. What came next was the part of betrayal that does not make for dramatic storytelling, but that is in many ways the hardest part to survive. The long, unglamorous paperwork and lawyers in moving boxes aftermath of a marriage ending. Marcus moved into an apartment. He and Diana began the legal process of untangling 11 years of shared life, shared finances, shared property, shared parenthood. Diana, to her enormous credit, and to the enormous credit of the therapist she began seeing within 3 weeks of that Tuesday morning, channeled her anger into forward motion rather than into destruction. She changed her name on utility accounts. She made plans. She sat across from Lily and had the conversation no parent wants to have. The one about how families sometimes change shape without anyone losing their love for anyone else. And she had it with the steadiness that had always defined her, even while something inside her was simultaneously trying to reassemble itself from pieces she had not expected to be holding. She was not fine. She has never claimed to have been fine. But she was functional, which during the worst of it is sometimes the best that is available, and functional was enough to keep moving. Carter, across town, went quiet in the way that quiet men go quiet when they are dealing with something large. His clients reported no change in him. He showed up. He did the work. He was, by all external measures, exactly who he had always been. His friends worried about him in the way that friends worry about a man who does not emote loudly, with a low-level, persistent concern that had no specific incident to attach itself to, just a general sense that something was being processed internally that was too large for the pace of the processing. Carter did not rush. He had never rushed anything that mattered. He went home in the evenings to a house that had changed, that echoed differently now, that contained all the same furniture, but none of the same weight. He called his sons. He called his mother on Sunday, as he always had, and said he was doing fine, which was approximately 40% true. He made dinner on Thursday nights by force of habit, even though there was no one who needed him to. And he has said since that he kept making it because the habit was the one thing that felt continuous with the person he had always been. And he needed that continuity more than he needed to break the pattern. 6 weeks after Diana made that first call, her phone rang on a Tuesday evening while she was sitting on the couch going through mail. She looked at the screen. The name she had saved it under, in the contacts on her phone in the days after the discovery, was Carter, Renee's husband. She stared at it for 3 full rings. She almost did not answer because she had already given him the information she had called to give him, and she was not sure what was left to say, and she was also not sure she had the emotional bandwidth for another difficult conversation. She answered on the 4th ring. Carter said, "I just wanted to check on you. I know that's strange." And Diana said, "It is extremely strange." And Carter laughed. And then Diana laughed. And then they talked for 2 hours. And it was the first time since January that Diana had talked to anyone for 2 hours without the conversation centering on what had happened, what the next legal step was, who had said what to whom, and what everything was going to look like on the other side. They talked about everything else. They talked about their children. They talked about what it feels like to trust your own judgment after your judgment has been badly wrong. They talked about the strange, particular loneliness of being surrounded by people who love you and still feeling fundamentally alone in the experience you are living through. It was not romantic. It was not anything that could yet be named. But it was real in a way that very few conversations had been for either of them in a long time. And they both felt that, and neither of them said so, and neither of them needed to. The social fallout came, as it always does. Marcus's colleagues knew before Marcus had finished moving his things out of the house. Diana's friends took sides with the speed and certainty that friends take sides when a betrayal is unambiguous and the wrong party is someone they love. Most of them landed where they should have. A few surprised her. Renee retained her position at the company, which generated its own considerable wave of opinion in their shared professional community. Opinions ranging from appropriate outrage to pragmatic resignation to a subset of people who decided, as some people always decide in these situations, that there must have been more to the story than what was visible, which is a thing people say when the story is visible is too uncomfortable to sit with cleanly. Diana did not participate in any of it. She did not go online. She did not call people to give her side. She had more important things to do. She had a daughter to raise and a life to rebuild, and a therapist to see every Thursday afternoon and twice a week without quite being able to explain how it had become a recurring thing. She had Carter's voice on the other end of her phone. And Carter's voice, she was beginning to notice, had become one of the things she actually looked forward to at the end of a long and difficult day. 4 months after that first phone call, 4 months of twice-weekly conversations, of topics that had gradually shifted from the wreckage of their marriages to the texture of their ordinary lives. Of Diana noticing that Carter remembered the small things she mentioned in passing, and Carter noticing that Diana had a gift for saying the precise true thing when most people would reach for the comfortable, vague thing. Diana said something that surprised both of them. She said, "We keep talking on the phone like it's 1987, which is genuinely bizarre at this point. I feel like I should at least know what you look like in real life." Carter thought about it for a moment and then said he thought that was fair. And so they agreed to meet for coffee in a deliberately casual, low-stakes, we are just two people who have been through something difficult together way that both of them had privately told themselves was the entire extent of what this was. They were wrong about that, though it would take time before either of them was willing to name what they were wrong about. They met at a coffee shop in a neighborhood that belonged to neither of them, which was a small but significant detail, neutral territory, as though both of them understood without discussing it that this meeting required a space that carried no associations with anything that had come before. Carter was there first. Diana saw him through the window as she was walking toward the entrance and recognized him from the quality of the stillness. The same stillness she had noticed in his voice over the phone, translated into the physical. He was sitting with his hands around a coffee cup, not looking at his phone, just waiting, in the unhurried way of someone who is comfortable inside a moment without needing to fill it. He had brought her an almond croissant. She had mentioned almond croissants exactly once, in passing, 6 weeks earlier, in the middle of a long conversation about something else entirely. She had not expected him to remember. He had remembered. She would think about that detail many times in the months that followed, not because it was grand or sweeping, it was a pastry, it was a small thing, but because of what it represented, which was a quality of attention that she had not realized she had been missing until she was suddenly in the presence of it again. They talked for 3 hours. They split the check exactly, as Diana had expected they would, and they shook hands goodbye in the parking lot like they had just concluded a business meeting, which made both of them laugh with the particular awkward laughter of two people who are aware that what just happened was not a business meeting and are not quite ready to characterize it as anything else. Diana drove home. She put Lily to bed. She sat in her kitchen in the dark for a while, not unhappy, not confused exactly, but turning something over in her mind that she could not yet fully name. She would let it be nameless for a long time. She was not in a hurry. She had learned over the previous 4 months that the things that matter most tend to reveal themselves more clearly when you do not rush them toward a conclusion. Now there is something worth stopping to address directly because it deserves to be answered honestly rather than danced around. The question that comes up every single time this story is told: is this too soon? Is this complicated? Does this cross some line that should not be crossed? The answer, in Diana and Carter's own words, is more honest than anything that could be constructed on their behalf. Diana has said, "I was not looking for anyone. I was still furious. I was still in the middle of grief that I had not finished. Carter was not a new person I was meeting. He was already someone who knew everything, someone who already understood the full weight of what I was carrying without me needing to explain any of it from the beginning. That is not something you find. That is something that finds you." And Carter has said, "We did not choose the connection. We just made the decision not to run from it." And there is a significant difference between those two things. That is their answer. You are welcome to have a different one, but it is worth sitting with theirs for a moment before you decide. Nothing happened quickly. This cannot be overstated because the story can read as though it moved faster than it did, and it did not. Diana and Carter were friends, genuinely, actually friends, for more than a year before either of them allowed anything beyond friendship to be named. They had coffee occasionally. They talked on the phone. They went for walks in the kind of public, low-key way that involves parks and coffee cups and conversations that start with one topic and end 2 hours later on something completely different. The way conversations go when two people are genuinely interested in each other's minds. Carter met Lily at month 8. It was incidental. Diana and Carter had planned to meet for coffee, and Lily's ride home from a friend's house fell through. So she came too, and the three of them sat in a booth and ordered food and talked. And when Carter drove Lily home afterward, Lily said to her mother, "He's not weird." Diana has described this as one of the highest compliments she has ever received on anyone's behalf. Carter's sons were a more complicated conversation. His eldest, Tyler, who was 21, was protective in the way that oldest children of betrayed parents sometimes become protective. with a vigilance born from having watched his family break apart and an attendant suspicion of anything that threatened to expose his father to further pain. This was understandable, and it was also, over time, something that Carter and Diana moved through together with patience and with honesty, because those were the only tools that ever actually work. There were months when Diana and Carter pulled back from each other. This is the part of the story that gets left out of the simplified version, but it matters. There were months when the weight of the circumstances felt too heavy, when the optics felt too fraught, when one or both of them decided that what they needed most was to tend to their own individual rebuilding, rather than to something new and undefined and fragile. They pulled back from each other during those months. They gave each other space without demanding to know what the space would ultimately mean. And then reliably, one of them would reach out, a text, a call, a short message that said nothing momentous, but that said, "I am still here, and I was thinking of you." And the connection would reassume its shape, a little stronger each time for having been tested and held. Diana has said that the things she learned during those months was that the connection was not something she was creating. It was something that already existed and that she was choosing, deliberately, to tend. Carter has said something similar. And the difference between something you build and something you tend is, when you think about it, considerable. Month 19. Carter's eldest son Tyler graduated from college. Carter had spent weeks carefully, thoughtfully asking Diana whether she would be willing to come. Not pressuring her, not assuming, but genuinely asking, giving her every opportunity to decline without consequence if the timing or the circumstances felt wrong. She said yes. She brought Lily. And the four of them, Diana, Lily, Carter, and eventually Carter's younger son as well, sat together at the outdoor ceremony in the late spring heat, this strange assembled collection of people whose lives had intersected in the most unlikely of ways, and watched a young man cross the stage and receive his diploma. Afterward, in the parking lot, while the crowd was dispersing and Tyler was taking photographs with his roommates, he pulled Diana aside. He said, "I want you to know something. My dad smiles more now than he has in years. I don't completely understand everything, and I'm not sure I need to, but thank you." Diana got into her car after that and cried for 20 minutes. She was not sad. She was not overwhelmed in the way that implies being unable to carry something. She was overwhelmed in the way that happens when something real and good arrives in a form you were not expecting, and your body needs a moment to process the arrival. A few weeks after Tyler's graduation, Carter asked Diana if she would meet him for coffee. She said yes. He asked if she wanted to go to the same place they had met the first time. She said yes. She sat across from him in the same coffee shop where he had been waiting when she walked through the glass door 19 months earlier, and before she had even looked at the menu, she saw it, the almond croissant. On the table in front of her seat, still in the paper bag from the counter, placed there before she arrived because he had arrived first, as he usually did. She looked up at him. He looked at her. And he said, not dramatically, not with the choreographed gravity of a man who has rehearsed what he is about to say. He said,
I need to
"I
tell
need to tell you that I love you." Not in an abstract way, not as a concept. In the actual way, the specific one, the one that means I think about you every day and I want good things for you, and I am better at being myself when you are in my life. I am not asking you to do anything about that. I just needed you to know it. Diana looked at him for a long time, and then she said,
Carter,
"Carter, I have been
Yes.
sitting across from you for almost 2 years pretending that not saying that out loud was protecting me. I love you too." And that was that. Not a fairy tale, not a movie, just two people in an ordinary coffee shop in a city that had already asked a great deal of both of them, finally saying the true thing. Carter proposed 9 months after that conversation. This detail matters because 9 months is not impulsive. 9 months is a man who knows what he wants, and takes it seriously enough not to rush it. He did not propose in a restaurant. He did not hire a photographer. He did not make a production of it because Carter was not a man who made productions of things. He proposed at his kitchen table on a Thursday evening after a dinner he had cooked. Chicken and roasted vegetables. Nothing elaborate, the kind of dinner you make when cooking is an act of care rather than a performance. He put a ring on the table in front of Diana's plate. He looked at her and said, "I would really like to do this, if you would." Diana has said that she said yes before she had fully processed what she was agreeing to, which, she says, was the clearest she had ever felt about anything in her life. The ring was simple. The table was ordinary. The kitchen smelled like rosemary. And that moment, Diana says, was the most herself she had felt since before any of this began. They told their families first, as people who have learned things the hard way tend to do, slowly, carefully, in person where possible, with space for the full range of reactions rather than the curated response you get from an announcement. Diana's mother took 3 days to call back. When she finally did, she said, "I have been thinking about this for 3 days, and here is what I keep coming back to. I think you are the bravest person I know." Diana's sister, who had been Diana's anchor through all of it, the person who had picked up every call in those early months, who had driven across 2 states to sit on Diana's couch and not say anything, just be present, because sometimes that is the entire job of love. Diana's sister cried and immediately began planning what she called the most triumphant bachelorette party in recorded human history. Lily, who was 15 by then, asked one question. She said, "Are you happy, Mom? Like, actually?" Diana said yes. Lily said, "Then I'm in," and meant it. Carter's sons required more time, as Carter and Diana had both understood they would, and as they had both committed to honoring rather than rushing. Tyler, who had moved from guardedness to cautious warmth over the preceding months, needed a few weeks after the engagement announcement to settle into the reality of what it meant permanently. He got there. He got there in the way that people get to difficult, emotional places when they feel respected in the process. Not pushed, not managed, not presented with a conclusion and told to adjust, but included, consulted, given room to feel what they felt on their own timeline. Carter's younger son, 20-year-old Jordan, took it better and faster than anyone expected, which turned out to be because Jordan had seen something in the year and a half before the proposal that he had not spoken aloud, but had clearly been quietly processing. He told his father afterward, "I knew this was where it was going. I've been watching you. You're different with her. Better." Carter said he cried when Jordan told him that. A controlled cry, in the deliberate way of a man who has decided that allowing himself to feel things is not a weakness, but a real one. Marcus, by that point, was still in his apartment on the other side of the city. Diana received a short, formally worded email when word of the engagement reached his circle. Word travels quickly in a community of shared history, and Marcus still had mutual friends with people Diana knew, which is an unavoidable feature of 11 years of shared life. The email said, "I hope you are happy." Diana read it twice. She believed that he meant it. She wrote back, "Thank you." She did not say anything else, because there was nothing else that needed saying, and Diana had gotten very good over the previous 2 years at only saying the things that needed to be said and leaving the rest to silence. Marcus and Renee, by that point, were no longer together. The relationship that had cost 2 marriages had not survived the removal of the conditions that had sustained it: the secrecy, the excitement of something forbidden, the particular compressed intensity of an affair that cannot exist in ordinary light. This is not an unusual outcome. There is a body of research and a long human record that suggests that the majority of relationships born out of affairs do not survive the transition to an open life, precisely because the open life strips away the very thing that made them feel significant. Marcus found this out. Renee found this out. And Diana, when she heard, felt something that was not satisfaction and was not grief, but was something in between, the complicated emotion of a person who does not wish suffering on anyone, but who has also done enough of her own work to be honest about the fact that there is such a thing as proportionate consequence. And then there is Renee, because the story is not complete without Renee, and the way the story of Renee ends is the part that no one anticipates, the part that lands the hardest in every single telling. 3 weeks before Diana and Carter's wedding, with the venue booked, the flowers ordered, Lily's dress chosen, Tyler's toast already written, even if he would not admit it, Diana's phone rang on a quiet Sunday afternoon. She looked at the screen. The name was Renee. She looked at it for a long time. She has said since that she does not fully know why she answered. Curiosity, she thinks. A sense that for the story to be complete, truly complete in the way that satisfies something real inside a person, rather than simply tying things up on the surface. There was one more thing that needed to happen. She picked up. Renee spoke first. Renee said, "I know I have no right to call you. I know that. And I know you could hang up right now, and I would not blame you. But I needed to say something to you directly, and I needed to say it myself rather than through anyone else." There was a pause, and then Renee said, "I am sorry. Not the kind of sorry that means I am sorry I got caught, or the kind that means I am sorry things unfolded the way they did as a logistical matter. I mean the actual thing. I looked at my own marriage, and instead of doing the hard, honest thing, which was to say that something was wrong and that I needed it to change, I chose something cowardly. I watched you, over these last 2 years, do the brave thing at every single step. You called Carter. You were honest with your daughter. You rebuilt something real. I just needed you to know that I see that I saw all of it, and that I am sorry." Diana was quiet for a long moment, long enough that Renee must have wondered if she had hung up without a word, which would have been a reasonable response and an understandable one. Then Diana said, "Thank you for saying that. I am not going to tell you it is okay, because it is not, but I hear you." They hung up. That was the last conversation they ever had. Diana has described that phone call as one of the most unexpected things in a story that had already contained more unexpected things than she had thought one story could hold. She said she hung up feeling lighter than she had expected, not absolved, not as though anything had been erased or corrected, but complete, as though a chapter that had been left technically open had finally, quietly, been closed. She sat in her kitchen for a while after that call, in the same chair, at the same kitchen table where everything had begun, where she had found the open laptop on that Tuesday morning, where she had sat with the phone in her hand before dialing Carter's number, where her whole life had cracked open and rearranged itself into something she had not chosen and could not have predicted, but that was, she understood now, more fully hers than anything she had possessed before. Diana and Carter were married on a Saturday in October, under a sky that was exactly the deep, clear blue that October skies in the Midwest can produce when the conditions are right and the light comes at the perfect angle. 80 people. The ceremony was outside, under an oak tree on the property of a small inn that Carter had found because it reminded him of something Diana had described once in passing, a place she had gone as a child with her family, with a porch that looked out over open land and a quality of quiet that felt earned rather than imposed. He had found it the way he found everything, carefully, attentively, with the particular devotion of someone who pays close attention to the things other people say when they think they are not being listened to. Lily was Diana's maid of honor. She wore a green dress and held her mother's hand so tightly during the ceremony that Diana's fingers were still pink an hour later. Tyler gave a toast that made 37 people cry, including Carter, who cried in the controlled, deliberate way of a man who has spent 2 years learning that allowing yourself to feel things fully is not a weakness, but a form of respect for the things that are happening to you. Jordan stood beside his father and beamed in the uncomplicated way of a young man who loves his family and is watching something good happen to it. Diana says the moment she holds on to from that day is not the ceremony. It is not the toast or the first dance or the moment she walked out of the inn's small side room on the arm of her sister and saw 80 people who loved her waiting in the afternoon light. The moment she holds on to is the next morning, the ordinary morning. Carter making coffee in the kitchen of the small house they had bought together 3 months before the wedding, in a neighborhood that was neither of their old neighborhoods, a clean start in the most literal sense. Lily asleep in the next room, teenage and impossible and everything. The sound of birds outside, the smell of coffee, the particular quality of light that comes through a kitchen window in October and lands on a wooden floor in a way that is almost unbearably ordinary and almost unbearably beautiful at the same time. Diana sat at the kitchen table and looked at it, all of it, the light and the coffee and the sounds from down the hall, and she thought, this is what fine actually feels like. Not the version of fine she had been maintaining for years inside a life that looked correct from the outside. The real version, the quiet, unhurried, grounded in something true version. It was smaller than she had expected fine to be, and it was more than she had known fine could be. And it was hers. There is something underneath this story that is worth naming before we close it out. Something that goes beyond the specifics of Diana and Marcus and Renee and Carter, beyond the affair and the phone call and the coffee shop and the wedding. Something about what this story is actually saying about the choices we make when we are at our most broken. There is a version of Diana's story that goes the way most of these stories go: the confrontation, the dissolution, the long, painful climb back toward a version of ordinary life, the slow rebuilding of a self that had been organized around someone else for 11 years. That version of the story is valid. That version of the story is what millions of people live, and they survive it with enormous dignity. But Diana's story went a different way. Not because Diana was lucky, and not because she made some magical right choice that automatically guaranteed a better outcome. Her story went a different way because of a single quality that Diana possessed and consistently applied, from the moment she closed that laptop on a Tuesday morning, all the way to the moment she said yes at a kitchen table over a Thursday night dinner. She refused to be reactive. She refused to let the worst thing that had happened to her determine who she was going to be inside it. And that refusal, quiet, unglamorous, mostly invisible to anyone watching from the outside, is what opened the door to everything that followed. There is also something to be said about Carter, about what it means for a man to answer a phone call from a stranger and respond to devastating news with kindness before he has processed his own pain. About what it means to show up consistently, without drama, without demanding recognition for the showing up, and to do it not because it is strategic, but because it is simply who you are. Carter did not set out to be the answer to anything. He set out to be honest, and to be present, and to be real, and the world around him eventually organized itself, slowly and painfully, and through a great deal of loss, into a shape that had room for those qualities to matter the way they deserve to. There is a lesson in Carter that is harder to articulate, but that is just as important as anything in Diana's story. It is something about the value of the kind of goodness that does not announce itself, that does not require an audience, that simply keeps showing up at 5:30 and on Thursday evenings and on Sunday phone calls to aging parents, and trust that the showing up means something, even when it cannot immediately see the evidence that it does. Now let us hear from you, because this story raises questions that no one person can answer alone. And the comment section on this video is going to be one of the better ones, if you are willing to bring your honesty to it. At what moment in this story did something shift for you? Was it when Diana made the decision to call Carter instead of Renee? Was it Carter's first response? Thank you for calling me. I'm sorry you had to. That changed how you understood who he was. Was it the almond croissant at that first coffee shop meeting? That small, attentive, completely characteristic thing? Was it Tyler pulling Diana aside in a parking lot after a graduation ceremony and saying that his dad smiles more now? Or was it Renee's phone call, 3 weeks before the wedding, that surprised you most? The moment when the person cast as the villain chose to be something more honest and more human than a villain. Tell us in the comments. And here is the question to sit with long after this video ends. Do you believe that Diana and Carter would have found each other anyway? If Marcus had never met Renee, if the affair had never happened, if two marriages had never broken apart in the same 48-hour window, would the particular version of Diana and Carter that existed on the other side of all that loss have ever come into being? Or was this one of those rare and difficult situations in which the destruction was not incidental to the building, but genuinely necessary for it? Did something have to be completely dismantled for something real to have room to grow? There is no settled answer to that question. Diana herself does not know it with certainty. What she knows is that she is here, that Carter is here, that Lily knows what it looks like for her mother to be genuinely, quietly, groundedly happy, that Tyler knows his father smiles, and that sometimes, not always, but sometimes, the road that was never supposed to be the right road turns out to be the only one that leads somewhere true. Before we go, let us know in the comments where you are watching from. We genuinely love knowing where in the world our community is. And if you are not yet subscribed, please do that right now so you never miss any of our upcoming videos, because what is coming over the next few weeks is extraordinary. There is a story coming up on this channel about a woman who discovered, after 30 years of marriage, that her husband had a second family living 7 miles away. Not in another state, not across the country, 7 miles. And what happened when she finally knocked on that door will test everything you think you understand about human nature, and about forgiveness, and about the lengths people go to in order to hold two lives together simultaneously. Until then, take care of yourselves, take care of each other, and remember, the ending of one story is always, always the beginning of another.